Hey, Fiends of the Pod, Nate Wyckoff, your host here again, reminding you like, subscribe, and yes, it is hard to come up with these extra little special things for every episode. But like my good friend behind me, Godzilla, I will not stop until every single building in a metropolitan area is destroyed if you don't like and subscribe. Enjoy, and please go to cultandclassicfilms.com to pick up exclusive cult movies, and also you can subscribe and have them delivered at a discount to your door every single month. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Cult and Classic.
Welcome, friends and fiends, to another episode of Cult and Classic Podcast, the podcast where we talk about two thematically linked films, one mainstream and one cult, and discuss them both. This is part 2 of our Afterschool Specials special, where we discuss, you guessed it, Afterschool Specials. Last week was part 1, where we talked about the famous or infamous 1990 special cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue, where cartoon characters from across many different properties and even mediums really sort of coalesced to help Michael get off drugs because his little sister wanted him to get off drugs, I guess. Yeah, that was a fun one. It was interesting, but now we're going in a live action route with 1987's The Day My Kid Went Punk. This is an interesting one. To be honest, I hadn't seen it before this viewing, and it completely defied my expectations, and I'm very excited to talk about it. This is part of the ABC After School Special series, which ran for, I want to say, like 70 episodes. Is sort of sporadic, multiple, yearly episodes that dealt with various things like drugs or peer pressure, all sorts of stuff.
I'm seeing it ran, let's see, 72 to 97 and 154 episodes across 25 seasons.
There you go. Many. And, we hear things like After School Special. We don't really have them very often anymore. And it used to be in the 70s through the, even the early mid 90s, we'd have these after school specials, and they sort of transitioned into the 90s. They transitioned into more one special episode of a TV show, like on a very special episode of Blossom, or a very special episode of Family Matters, or Tiny Toons. They would have these one-off specials that were often real big downers, and they were really bent on either scaring kids into following the rules or depressing kids, so making them scared of something.
Or every episode of Boy Meets World, really.
Yeah, totally, right? They never said like, you might do porn in your future. Yeah, so interesting enough. And of course, I'm Nate Wyckoff, your host, film critic, and comedian. And we have here as well, Greg Johnson. How are you doing today, Greg?
I'm doing great, Nate. I don't have any kids, so life is treating me well.
Yeah, this is fascinating, because the thing about these after school specials is they often had well recognized cast members. We don't have anyone that I think millennials up would immediately recognize unless you're into classic TV. But Bernie Coppel's probably the one that I recognize most readily. He plays the dad of the family whose kid goes punk. He was a regular on Get Smart. He played Conrad Siegfried. He also, those of you who've only seen the Get Smart remake with Steve Carell and Anne Hathaway, he was in there in a cameo. But he was kind of a staple on 70s and 60s TV shows, and is just a big character actor in a lot of stuff. And there's a lot of other people in this. Everyone is pretty much a character actor from somewhere. Jay Underwood plays the lead, Terry, who is the one that goes punk. He has been in a gajillion things in the 80s as he got older. He was Bug and Uncle Buck, Not Quite Human. He played Chip, just, the lead. A lot of stuff. So interesting cast, especially if you're maybe in your 40s, late 30s to 50s, I guess I would say. Then you're going to recognize a lot of these cast members. But if you're a millennial or something, you've never seen an after school special, they often have this sort of holier than thou message. It's sort of like when you accidentally watch a Hallmark movie for Christmas and you realize that it's one of those super religious ones that ends with like, praise his light, God will save you all, like that sort of thing. Like, it doesn't have Dolly Parton in it, but you could tell that they really wanted Dolly Parton in it. And we love Dolly here. The Day My Kid Went Punk is shockingly progressive. And I was surprised before I even get into the actual plot. I mean, we know that a kid goes punk and his parents are upset. Uh, 5 years earlier, this is often when it's talked about at all, it's usually talked about in relation to an episode of the crime show Quincy, which followed Quincy the coroner as he assisted people in solving these crimes. There was an episode about the dangers of punks and punk music and punk culture. And I believe it was 82, I think it was. And it was 5 years earlier, but it had like this lasting impact. It's one of the more memorable, recognized episodes of the Quincy show. And in it, the punk scene is like this violent, divey, drug-filled, sex-hazed, monstrous thing. And it's so heavy-handed that punk is essentially, devil music where Satan will possess you and you'll kill your parents and then eat your dog and then do a line of blow off a series of prostitutes, catch the disease and die. Like, I'm not kidding. It's really heavy-handed. In fact, at the end, I think Quincy, if I remember correctly, because I tried to rewatch it in preparation for this, and it was several weeks ago, and I still don't remember all the details because it's hard to watch because of how ridiculous it is. But he's like listening to not classical, like I think big band music, kind of swingy jazz music, and he's like, why would anybody listen to music like that anyway? Like, it's garbage, it perpetuates violence. When music like this is love. And you're just like, okay, all right, we're gonna glaze right over all of the insane racism issues involved with the white co-opting of jazz music and everything that goes along with that. And we're just going to focus on the fact that a coroner solves crimes. This is a totally different deal. I thought it wouldn't be. I thought it would be closer, but it's not. We have two parents who are distant. They have three kids. One of them is old enough to, he's like 35, and he's still home, and he's like head of the Young Republicans Club or whatever. I don't even remember his name. I think it's Chip or something. And then we have a young daughter who's like the baby of the family, the blonde, blue-eyed young daughter. And then we have a mom who is like a professor at this university, and she's giving this big speech coming up that can make or break her career. And then we have the dad, who's an author who writes about crisis management among families and things like that. And then in the middle, we have middle child Terry, who is a really skilled violinist of classical music. And he's going to have a summer away working at the kids' corral, right? The nursery, essentially, that what would you call it? The babysitting wing of this fancy hotel that's going to be hosting his mom's college's big conference. So she gets him a job there. On paper, he sounds great. He's classically trained violinist. He's straight-laced, all this stuff. And he keeps telling his parents, like, I'm going to really like find myself this summer. I think I'm going to change my hair. And they're like, great. Yeah, whatever. He's like, yeah, I'm thinking I might, try out some rock music, something different. And like, whatever. And so he goes, and literally he goes to, like, is it the bus or the plane station? I don't know where he's going, but he goes there, and he literally goes into the bathroom, opens up his suitcase, and pulls out like this tattered black shirt, leather jacket with chains and grommets, and shaves part of his hair and does it up into this crazy, like, sort of new wave Flock of Seagulls deal, and spray paints the front of it red, and wears eyeliner, and then he goes out, and he's like this new person, and he's super happy about it. He goes to the hotel, and they're like, the woman who is the manager doesn't believe that he's going to get hired. She's played by Roxy Roker, another well-known character actor. And she goes to the head of the owner and says, like, this guy says he's here for the job. And the owner's like, wow, he looks crazy, but yeah, he's got good references, and we need this conference. He's the daughter of the person that we're dealing with for the conference, so we're hiring him no matter what. Turns out he's great with kids. He starts to go more bonkers and wears some new wave makeup, the whole like hardcore contouring under the cheekbones, and sort of wins everyone over by being great with kids. He gets a gig playing every Friday and Saturday night at a local bar with this punk band. And by the way, that's, for someone who sang for a punk band for 10 years, he's the regular band for Friday and Saturday night. I don't care if that's the dinkiest bar, which it's not. That's a big deal. Like, that's he's actually probably making at least a little bit of money off that. Like most people don't get that far. Normally you get like the opening slot for the late shift on like Friday or Saturday night if you're lucky, and probably Thursday or Sunday or some garbage like that. So anyway, he's having a great life, at which point his parents come to check on the hotel for the conference and are horrified. He's wearing earrings, he looks like a clown, blah, blah, blah. Basically, they go back and forth until he just stays steadfast. And it blew my mind that this character is like, this is me. Like, I'm getting the things that I wanted, and I'm getting the attention that you didn't give me by changing my appearance. And I don't think I'm going to change it. And in the end of I'm going to spoil this, but at the end of this film, which is it's short, it's about 42 minutes. So it was an hour runtime on TV, says, like, I think I'm going to stick with rock music, but I'll stop wearing makeup because I don't have to. And I know it bothers you, basically. And I was just blown away by the fact that I think what a lot of people like myself went into this watching, whoever saw the ads, right, which have like straight laced Terry on one side and like a sweater vest, with like new wave goth punk Terry on the other side, like, glaring at the camera, like, Susie and the Banshees kind of deal. I think they thought that it was going to be a very different, like, cautionary tale. And instead it was basically like, accept your kids for who they are, you idiots. And I loved it. I totally loved it. I've just babbled on about this whole thing. Greg, what was your expectation going in, and what is your feeling now that you've seen this?
Well, I thought it was going to be a lot wilder, and I feel like that's what I'm hearing from you as well. I thought this was going to be batshit insane, and it was fairly tempered. It had some moments here or there that, I was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting take, and moments that I'm like, oh, that's really backwards. I'm thinking about, there's a kind of a good bit near the beginning when he still hasn't gone punk yet, where he asks a fellow band member or orchestra member at his high school, like clearly out on a date or to coffee or something of that nature, and she's like, oh, no thanks, and walks off, and he sees her walk out and meet up with this punk, like total punk looking dude, and they walk off together, and his parents say something to the effect of, oh, I don't know why she's going off with him, like he looks like a bad kid, blah blah blah. And the guy, our main character Terry, is like, oh, I think he looks really cool. And it was just, it's fun to see a different take versus what could have easily been a moment where he's like, oh, women don't like nice guys, and like just becomes this piece of shit. But instead he's like, no, like, I want to, like, man, that guy's cool as hell, like of course she's going out with him, like I should think about my image, and I should improve myself in some way or change things. And like that's a really good moment versus later on there's a bit where Terry's gone punk, and the hotel owner is talking to him by the pool, and he's kind of saying something to the effect of, why do you put the makeup on your face, and why do you make, I think verbatim, like, why you're a good kid, why do you make it so hard for people to see that?
Yeah.
And Terry comes back with something about, like, I was never noticed before, and now I am, and I like how I look, and like, I love the attention I get. And right on cue, two like good looking teen girls come up and are asking him about getting them into the club for the night. And he's like, yeah, like, ask for my name at the front door. And they walk off giggling, and the hotel owner kind of like sees this and turns to Terry. He's like, oh,
why do you do this? And then he comes, and then that happens, and he's like, okay, but still.
Yeah, which it's a very funny moment, but it's kind of a backwards moment of, there's two men having a disagreement, and it's settled when one of the men, his side of the argument lets him get girls, and so the other one is like, oh, okay, I guess you have some merit. Like,
yeah, it's interesting because Corinne, my wife, and I were watching this, and we both were kind of just agog at the fact that my expectations were constantly subverted at every corner in this. And that was one of those moments where he's giving him this thing, and Corinne's like, no way that, like, a man essentially wouldn't be like, like, oh, you get girls with this, so that's okay. And I mean, it's a huge stereotype, and they play it that way. And the reality is a very well conversation, especially in 1987, would have gone that way, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I was just blown away at how the character of Terry is such a hero, because really he's constantly affronted by people being like, why are you such a freak, basically? And he stays steady in his resolve to not attack them and just be like, well, you know what? I like the way I look, and it makes me feel like me. And it was weird because it was the same arguments and language that I see a lot of people who are trans now talking about it with people who are sort of essentially attacking, you know, their decisions to transition and things like that. They're like, look, this is me. Like, what I look like is sort of secondary to who I am. And this is the image that I like to present. So you can accept it and be a part of my world, or you cannot like it and not be a part of my world. And that's fine. That's your decision. And the fact that he's so sure of himself in this all the way through, and the fact that they allowed him to maintain his image until the end, and that that's his choice, and that his family, you know, not totally like, you know, you taught us a lesson, son, you're so great, they're still not 100% thrilled with all of his decisions.
Yeah, the dad at the end says like something like, "Oh, and like you know, you're a haircut away from whatever." He says something
Yeah,
like that,
he stops wearing
and
makeup. Yeah, and he's like,
yeah, and he's like, "Oh, like hey, don't push it, dad." And then they all
yeah,
laugh, and that's the
yeah.
end of it.
And it's like really, I thought it was a very healthy, realistic way, because you have this we have this idea, like I always do, where it's like it's all or nothing, but the reality is it's not. Like, this is was my argument, being from the East Coast and having seen say, and I'm gonna get flack for this, and that's okay, and we can talk about it. Feel free to send us messages on cultandclassicpodcast@gmail.com. But you know, Bernie Sanders is very popular with our age group and younger, and the things he says would be great if we had them. But I know for a fact that as he's been in politics in Vermont for many, many, many years, the things he's pushed for tend to be sort of essentially protest votes. And the problem is that those do not get change. So while he's pushed for a lot of great things, he's attained very few of them, if any. I really don't think he's attained any. The things that have come beside him, because there's much more support that's needed than just his vote. And he's voted against some things because there's language or aspects of it that aren't what he wants, which someone like me, a moderate who really wants desperately to see positive change, feels hurt by, because we're not getting the little bit that we can get now. We're getting nothing because it's all or nothing. And that is a mindset that so many of us have, that as we get older, we tend to sort of push to the side, or we modify it to be like, okay, what's the best option here to get closest to what I want, or what's best for me and the people I care about. And that's where this one went right. It doesn't go all in or all not. There's no moment where he's like, you accept me for who I am, or I'm out of it, I'm out of here. There's never that moment. Like, even when he gets upset with his parents, which is several times, and reasonably so, because they're kind of assholes. Like, at the beginning especially, I'm like, we all know people like this. Some of us, these might be our parents, or we might be that person at first, where it's like, you know, like at the beginning, he's like, I'm thinking of getting my ear pierced. And his dad's like, over my dead body. And his mom said, just make sure they use a sanitized needle, which is sort of a great dichotomy, right? And the reality is that when he actually does these things, his dad is the one that's like, look, we need to understand this, why he's doing this, rather than just be upset. Whereas the mother's upset. And she's upset, of course, for her own reasons. She's concerned about the image that he'll present for her. And we've seen that in lives, all of our lives too, right? And it was nice to see that there isn't an all or nothing. And there's this great scene that it upset me at first, but it was very realistic and not wrong, where the older, I think he's supposed to be German, but the professor who leads the band, right?
Right,
His high
right,
school
yeah.
band, he goes to, after he has this new image, right? And he comes in, and everybody's getting assigned first chair with this, whatever. And at the end, he's like, you didn't give me any assignment. And he's like, that's right. And he said, like, you told me last year that I would be first violin. And he's like, well, that's right, but look at you, and you know, and that gets the dander up, right? Gets my hackles up. I'm like, oh, this old man, like, is so wrong. And then he's like, listen, the important thing in the band is that the audience hears whatever, Mozart or whatever piece we're playing. And when one person is detracting from it, it's not going to work because they're not going to be listening to the music. He's like, however, and I look forward to seeing if you don't want to change how you look, I look forward to seeing what you do with your rock and roll music. And I'd like to go see you. And he turns around and he's like, well, that form of music is a lot more accepting. You could come in looking like you are now. And he's like, right. And that's a decision that you need to make. And it's your decision. And I respect it no matter what you choose. And it totally, like, again, subverted my expectation because he's saying, and then the kid walks out and the girl that he asked out in the beginning when he was a dorky looking guy is waiting for him. And she says, he's not going to give you a position, is he? And he goes, no. And she goes, that's not fair or something. And he says, actually, it's my choice. And I think he's the first person that ever told me that. And like, it was
Yeah.
a really defining moment because he even says at one point, like, I can't have it all. And it is true, right? Like, we make decisions based on what we want and what's best for us. And we can't always have the both sides of everything. And that doesn't mean that we should suffer under the heel of an oppressive regime or whatever that we don't like. And it doesn't mean that we should expect everyone to accept us 100% of the way all the time just because we say so. It's not going to happen.
I think it's so great that the orchestra leader at this school, he doesn't make any assumptions about Terry because of how he dresses. The argument isn't you dress like this, therefore you're a drug addict. Therefore, it's I have this, well, one, this is my orchestra, and two, I want it to look a certain way. And I think that the orchestra has a certain, like, there's a music theory behind it, there's a presentation behind, like, there's all these things that are playing into it, and I'm going to go a different direction than your style. And like, it's not, there's no ill will, there's no like you're upending my Christian values, and so this is how I'm going to get back at you. It's just it's business, it's art, it's you say that you're gonna do a classic performance of Hamlet, and your Hamlet comes in with like long Fabio hair, and you go, well, we're gonna cut it because that's in with the style I'm doing. It's much more of an artistic discussion than it is some arbitrary, admonishing. I think that you talked about, and I mean, it's really clear there, if you compare what this is, which it's about a kid putting on punk clothing and dressing a different way, and that's all it's about. But if there's clearly a parallel between trans identity stories and different gender identity stories, period, different sexuality identity stories, so on and so forth. But I think that this short works because at the end of the day, it's dealing with small potatoes. It's not about trans or sexual identity issues. It's about dressing up, and it's about style. And that's it. And so, we can have an ending that's very moderate, because that's fine. That's fine at the end of the day for, the kid to kind of say, oh yeah, I'm gonna meet you halfway, parents. Versus if this were a story about sexual identity, there is no halfway.
Right.
So,
but, I think a lot of people dealing with that sort of have had to deal that halfway, right? Like, especially here in the LGBTQIA plus community, it's like, look, my parents love me and they say they love me, but they don't want to hear about my lifestyle. And it doesn't feel good, I'm sure, because everyone wants to be their full self to them. But I know that a lot of people deal with that because they want to maintain that relationship with their loved ones. And that's sort of their cross they choose to bear. And that's what I liked about this, right? Like, he's choosing his path and he finally has a choice. And I love, there are moments where I'm sure that the writer here is Fern Field, and he produced a lot of the specials as well as many other TV things. And he wrote a few of them. And he also wrote for Mr. Wizard's World a little bit, but he clearly sort of understood this is for America at large, right? This is for the terrible term, Mon Pa six pack or whatever, Joe Beer can, whatever horrible term, it had to be where the kid in the room and the adults in the room both could look at it, and whatever they're feeling, they get a little bit closer to understanding and compromise. And it's these things like this one clearly knew we're not going to get all the way there. We can't have, we can't really have some of the music that, punk music lyrics here that it really exist. We can't do that because it's going to incite conflict in the people watching, and that's not the point. The point is to see that both these people, all these people love each other, or this one person is being misjudged because of how he looks, and everyone is taking the time to get there, and ultimately they can somewhere in the back of the head realize that, oh, I was wrong about this person. Hopefully the next time they see someone that's different, they're going to be a little less snap judgment-y. And there's this really cool scene where Terry is taking care in the kids room, right, where a lot of the parents at the beginning, just like the manager, were really upset because they're like, look at him, he's terrifying looking, like we're scared of him. And he starts just playing a nice song on guitar, and all the kids just quiet down and go right over, and they love him, and the kids absolutely adore him. And then we get this sort of uppity, very wealthy, prissy woman who is affiliated high up with the company. She's like the wife, I think, of one of the leaders of the college, so the important to the conference. She has a daughter who has MS or something. She has braces on her legs. And she comes in, she's like, I thought this was a nice establishment. There's no way I'm letting her in here. And they leave. And nicely, the owner defends him. But then the owner gets mad because the manager tells him who she was. And then he's like, why can't you be normal? Essentially, like, I need you to look like a human when you're here. And he walks away. And we get this scene where Terry like looks at himself, and he's got makeup on. He's like, I think I do look human. And then he's like, I'm just going to keep doing my thing. And we get this great scene later where the guy at the corral where they have horses, the kids are riding, and he's telling this woman with her daughter with braces, like, I can't put her on a horse. Like, it's dangerous. They won't let us. It's liability. You just can't do it. And the girl's sobbing. And we get this awesome scene where Terry comes up, and he doesn't address the mom. He doesn't. He addresses the little girl, and he does, these are like all the things that they teach you to deal with children. Like, he does all of them right. He gets down on her level, he goes down, and he starts talking to her like she's a person. He doesn't dumb anything down. He doesn't use any strange, like any sort of like, I'm like you, he just is like, you want to be normal like other kids. Because first he's like, hey, there's a place in the city that I'm sure your mom can check out where they can get you on a horse, and lots of people, who are different like you can get on horses. And she's like, it's kind of heartbreaking. She's like, I don't want to be different. I want to play with the other kids. I want to go. And he's like, you know what? You say you don't want to be different, and I'm always the opposite way. Like, look at me, I'm silly looking, right? Like, and she's this great scene. She's like, I think you're beautiful. And it's just this adorable scene where essentially he's telling her, like, difference is okay, and everyone's different, and it's totally great. And he gives her a doll with braces on it, and like the mother totally has this turnaround because, and that's kind of realistic, as sugary as it is, like, not many parents, when someone loves your child, can dislike them, right? Like, people can forgive a really bad monster if they're kind to your child, I think.
Well,
And
I think someone healing your child when they're clearly
yeah,
hurting,
yeah,
I agree. I thought that scene, and then I'm sure you're about to get into it, but later she stands up for Terry when during
at the conference.
at the conference, like I think Terry's a pretty swell kid or whatever she says.
Yeah.
It all felt very believable. I mean, the whole thing felt it felt believable.
Yeah, and it was one of those things where it works because the character of Terry feels genuine and honest. Like, if it was like, if the whole setup, as you sort of got to, if the whole setup was he wanted to be like cool looking so he'd get the girl and all this stuff, that would be different. But really, it comes out that, because his parents kind of talk about that, right? They're like, it's just a phase, or he's doing it to get our attention. And then when he finally has their attention, he's happy about it, but he doesn't change, and they're like mystified.
Yeah,
And he's like, but I'm not, this isn't why I'm doing this. Like,
that's a
I'm
great byproduct of it. But
exactly, right? Like, I'm glad that you guys are actually being parents now, but and I like too that, as I said, Terry is sort of this hero character because he like when he's talking to the girl in the braces, he even kind of gets a dig at the mom while she's there, and not a mean-spirited one, but he's like lots of people think I'm scary. I know your mom thought I was scary. You know what I mean? Like it just, but and it's sort of, it's like this gentle chastising. You know what it reminded me of? He's really a Jesus figure in many ways, and it sounds crazy, but he is, because he is presenting this image and lots of people are upset and don't like it, but he remains a constant. He's chosen his path, and despite internal concerns and outside pressures, he maintains what he believes is right, and what's right for him is what feels honest and genuine to him. And so it's really nice. Even like we get like little bits with like his older brother, who's a total jackass and essentially every 80s villain ever, um who's like I'm a young Republican and I'm like all good looking and I always tuck in my shirt, and I'm like, well, you don't like tweeze your unibrow and you're talking about your brother looking weird. Like, come on, bro, like just deal with that. But that was me being hateful. And it's like i I believed every step of the way. I found this movie more tense than any thriller I've seen in the past, God knows when, because I was waiting for something awful to happen. Because every single thing that this kid did was out of kindness or just desire, like victimless desire. And oftentimes we see those people get chastised in movies. And I loved that this one didn't do that ultimately. You know, we get this compromise. The parents are still bickering about what he should do. And yet he makes his decision and they don't shy away from the decision. I thought they were going to end this when Terry walks in to the music hall by himself with his jacket and looks and sort of hears back all, like relives seeing his parents stand up and clap after his recital and all these things. I thought it was going to end there and we were going to be left to know, what did he decide? Did he decide to give up his punk image and go back to classical or what? And they didn't do that. They essentially said, you know, he does this little joke. He's like, look, I'm glad you guys are paying attention to me now, but it was kind of easier before, you know, just kidding, but I'm going to make my own decisions. Thanks for the input. And he makes his own decision. And it really, it was fascinating. It was fascinating. And of course, we're talking about very new wave punk, you know, like you know, lots of makeup, Streets of Fire, not so much Sex Pistols. And it was nice to see all of that, especially when his mom is trying to figure out how she can change, because we didn't mention the big sort of mini climax leading up to the big climax is when his mom's big presentation is punk syndrome, how to prevent your kids from falling victim to it. And of course then, you know, she's being interviewed by a TV crew beforehand, and he's like, hey mom, and they're like and you know, they're gonna do like slam piece on her, and it's just like, she's like, oh, I still find the mom problematic. And because she really is self-centered and she really does care more about her own deal than her son's needs or struggles or whatever.
I don't think she learns anything. I mean,
I
she
don't,
kind
because
of
she comes out
gets,
ahead anyway, you know.
yeah, she turns it around and does this panel where she's like, oh, like, okay, like my original talk at this psychologist seminar was going to be how to prevent your kids from going punk. My son has outed me as clearly I failed in that. So instead it's going to be a roundtable kind of open interview, whatever you want to call it, where she brings her son, some of his bandmates up on stage, and it's kind of a very cordial free-for-all where they can
Panel
people,
discussion, yeah.
yeah, panel discussion. People are asking questions, yelling things out. They're, you know, the kids up on stage are, you know, giving their side of things, and it, you know, it ends on a nice note, but like everyone's like, to his mom, like, wow, like that was the best, that was great, that was even better than what you had planned. And she's like, oh, I guess like my kid being punk like works out well for me
Right,
financially, like.
right. And it's sort of, it's a catch-22, right? Because you don't like that she doesn't get some sort of comeuppance from a narrative structure, but from a reality structure, yeah, like this is real. Like it rings true. Parents who have problems with how their kids live their life are unlikely to change dramatically for anything. If you can't change for your kid, who else are you going to change for? It's not going to happen, right? So the best you can hope for is that they learn to take some sort of personal pride in it. And that's sort of what happens with her. And I liked that there was a happy ending for Terry, and so rarely is there. And I liked the panel discussion too, because they gave moments where like the band members are like, I got my ear pierced and my dad said, get out. That was it. And again, we get close to that. There's a couple of bits of language where we get close to essentially you're being too feminine to be a man, right? With your earrings or your makeup, why, you know, makeup's for women, like all the, there's a couple of those instances which have always, you know, I mean, I think it was RuPaul who actually coined the term gender fuck, right? In the 80s, where like you, or maybe it was even the early 90s, but I think that was the late 80s phase. Could be wrong, but anyway, where it's like, you know, but Bowie did it, like lots of big celebrities have done this idea that we can cross the gender line and as we know it, and that's okay, and you can still identify as whatever or whoever, and not be ostracized for that. And we get little tidbits of that, and I can say too, like I like that they have the panel acknowledge, like, yeah, like there are some violent people who identify themselves as punks, but they're also violent bankers and truck drivers. You know, it's that whole thing where when 9/11 happened, the attack of the Twin Towers in the United States, you know, Muhammad Ali was still alive. I believe Muhammad Ali is passed, right? Who knows, my brain, I live in old movies, so sometimes I forget, but you know, he had converted to Islam, and an interviewer said right after 9/11, how does it feel to know that people who follow your faith have done such a terrible thing? And he looked at them and he said something direct to the effect of, how does it feel to know that Hitler was a Christian? Like, how dare you ask that of someone? You know what I mean? Because you can't, like, that's so putting one person or any group of people on the spot for the actions of separate people is uh, a missed activity. Now, on that note, I am not saying that people who are Caucasian should not have some sort of reparations or understanding of the social and economic effect of something as widespread and historically damning as slavery. That is not the same thing. We do owe, for the betterment of our whole society, some sort of fixes, reparations, and understanding so we can move forward. So I'm just going to throw that out there because I don't need any crazy right-wing trolls on this podcast saying, you go. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that, you know, judge people how you would like to be judged, and things will probably be a lot better. So yeah, we're going to move on to the recommendations here. I'll start. The Day My Kid Went Punk, ABC After School Special, 1987. I wholeheartedly recommend this. I actually looked in the mirror and I'm like, wow, I want to get some tattoos and shave the sides of my head right now, because that Terry is my new idol. Like, it was just so fantastic. And the idea that it sort of was the same feeling but an opposite vibe of when I saw the Queers play a couple, like a decade or two ago in New Hampshire, and I was like, these guys are punk as fuck, and I don't see a single tattoo. They're wearing like a trucker cap and a t-shirt, and I know they do have tattoos somewhere, but like, you know, it's just like really like, you can be whoever you are, and how you look does not have to reflect that in a stereotyped way to those around you. It can, but it's really up to your own personal decision. And at the same time, you have to understand that how you present yourself is a first impression to people. So, you know, the fact that Terry went to work for a new job dressed in the way that he did is shocking, because most of us know that that's not something you would expect a certain image when you're going to a job interview, essentially. And it's because of outside circumstance, namely the hotel wanting his mom's business, that they hired him anyway. And it turned out that that was just the lucky chance he needed for them to sort of fall in love with him. But we understand as adults that that's just, you can't always count on that. So you hedge your bets and you do what you think is best at the time. And I just really liked that all of these things are played out sort of realistically in this after school special. And compared to like Cartoon All-Stars to the Rescue, which is sort of camp fun and value, the message is muddled. And, you know, we know that the people who made that smoked marijuana at some point, the vast majority of them. So to make a product like that that says that it's going to lead to people doing, you know, crystal methamphetamines or something like is ingenuine. Whereas this one, The Day My Kid Went Punk, is sort of the complete opposite. It's someone doing a very genuine, kind message with realistic, honest portrayals of sort of stand-in people from all of our own lives that we can see ourselves in. Greg, would you recommend The Day My Kid Went Punk 1987? And if so, why and to who?
I'm gonna say no again. You know, we talked about a lot of the good points, but I think it's felt too long. I didn't really mention that. These great moments that we talked about are kind of in between a lot of dry, a lot of boring, a lot of just kind of you're living moment to moment. You're waiting for the next crazy thing out of someone's mouth. You know, I teased you a couple episodes ago about, oh, you know, this movie is pretty good, Nate. What's wrong with you? Why would you pick this? And you know, I don't want to talk for all of our listeners, but I would like to make an assumption that most of them, they're here for some crazy stuff. They're here to, you know, hear us talk about some wild shit. And the day my kid went punk, it's not wild. I'm not going to say interesting because that's a worthless word, but it's worthy of discussion. And that makes it, I think, good in my opinion. But you know, we talked about this this series had 154 episodes. This is part of season 16 I'm seeing, when we have such tales as Just a Regular Kid, an AIDS story, in which a teenager discovers they've been infected with AIDS by a blood transfusion. I was looking up what are some of the best after school specials of all time before, and there's one called Daddy Can't Read, also from this series. And this season,
very famous, yes.
Yeah, where a teenager does not understand why her father doesn't want a literacy campaign at his job, and then realizes he, in fact, cannot read. I'm thinking that in, you know, my usual fashion, recommending something else, take a look at this series of ABC After School Specials and see if there's not an episode for you, because some of them just sound absolutely insane.
They are,
and I'd like to view some of those.
They're very just to cut in real quick, they're very extreme in many cases too. And for example, just looking at the season 17, the first episode deals with a girl who's raped by the most popular boy in school when he goes on a date. Then the next episode is about a family whose eldest daughter is killed, and the family is trying to come to grips and survive. There's another one where a group of kids have to decide when it's okay to tell on their friend when he starts to do cocaine, like kids, you know, little
Which
kids.
Never narc ever. If you take anything from this, do not narc.
And then and I've seen this one, which was from '89, Just Tipsy Honey, when a teenage girl's in total denial about her mom's drinking problem.
That's what I'm here for. I want to see some batshit.
Yes. And I was expecting that. And it was, I guess what was most shocking to me was the fact that this was a well-balanced, like at one point the mom's like, this can't be right because he's the most well-adjusted of all of our kids. And you're like, he is the most well-adjusted of everyone in this whole show.
But I love funny. That doesn't the father, she says that and he's like, well, he was, and then does like a pantomime of rubbing his hand across his face as if putting on makeup or something. So again, there's really funny bits in this, but it's good. If you want to watch something that makes you think and is worth discussing with your partner, your friend, your parents, whatever. And to that extent, I wish I'd brought this up when we talked with Tad about Cartoon All-Stars, and I wish either him or Mandy had been here, because I'm curious what their take as, you know, the resident parents, you know, that we know of the the group. I'm curious what they would think about this. You know, their kids are young enough that I don't think they're really thinking about this yet, but you know, after school specials run that weird line between, in lieu of actually having a conversation with your kids, consider having them watch this. And I'd be curious to hear a parent's take on these effectiveness, things that they like, things that they don't, how they feel as either supplementary material so that they don't have to talk to their kids, or complementary. And you know, I'm going to talk to my kids, but I'm going to play this for them, or we're going to watch it together, or whatever.
Yeah, and it's sort of like you're saying. I think a lot of people, the hope was like the cartoon All Stars. When Barbara Bush says like, after you watch this together with your children and then
Yeah, which
talk to them about it.
I liked that.
Yeah, and they used to be, a lot of the 70s, reel shorts that teachers would show often had like, now break for discussion, like where the class would talk about it. And I think what we're getting at is we were surprised that this was truly a wholesome special that had some honesty and genuine intent, when often after school specials are famous for truly being exploitative, right?
Or the Muppet Babies taking you on a drug trip through your brain.
Right. Or like the day little Timmy learned what a needle was. Like, you know what I mean? Like walking along the beach. Like
this is your brain on drugs and it's a frying egg.
Like these insane things that like on paper you can sell it. Like, yes, learning about date rape is important for young people, because especially for women, because it happens and they need to know that it's not okay and that they need to go to someone. But you're often like, okay, did this short teach me that? Or was it really a disturbing story that gets our voyeuristic interest in to know about this person who's undergone a terrible tragedy that we should just peek in on, and that wasn't what this was. And because of that, I was surprised.
I totally off topic, but I heard some great quote from someone where they said, if I should ever be killed, like murdered by a serial killer, my greatest fear is that I should end up on some white person's podcast about serial killers, like, and having my story told. I think that hits to the heart of, at a certain point, these just become exploitative. And, fortunately, these are not The Day My Kid Went Punk because of the fact that it's genuinely well thought out. Cartoon All Stars, because it's so batshit crazy, it can't be.
That so many people got on board with this. It was just a mess.
And
I will say before we go, because we've done our recommendations and I talked a lot about this, the one thing I want to mention that is interesting and is sort of a failure of the time, being 1987, is that it was great that they cast a Black person as the manager of the hotel, not the owner, but the manager of the hotel. But there's a crazy line where he's like, they've hired him, and the manager, she's actually the one that's like, can't believe you hired him. And he's like, it is weird that the mom didn't tell us about like what he looked like. I wonder why. And she's like, I know why. And nowadays it would be very clearly that, he has makeup on his face and his hair is weird. I wonder, like, his skin's a different color and he can't have the hair the way he wants it. I wonder why there would be a problem, because of course those are things that Black people have dealt with for generations here.
It was an interesting choice that they had, I believe, the only person of color in the film, as far as I can remember, being one of the biggest pushback characters on how he looks.
It was weird because, and I mean, we know that like Samuel L. Jackson's character in Django, yes, it's an extreme example from a sort of satirical take, but the manager of the house, the house slave being the one that's also on the side of the overseer, like, it's weird, and it just raises some unclear messages, which I think that the biggest solution would have been to have lots of people of color in this. And then it wouldn't have mattered.
Have lots of different people of different backgrounds and races and creeds. And then when one of them is a good character and one's a bad character, you don't think anything of it because everyone's
right. And it's like in the original Ninja Turtles comic book, right? Like Baxter Stockman is an extreme villain and he happens to be Black. And later on, there are other people of color. But because he's the main person of color in the series and he's a villain and everyone else isn't, even though, of course, we have like, 4.5-foot turtles who are the main, like, it's ridiculous to think, but the optics aren't great. And we think about that more now because we're more aware of how it feels for people who are in the minority or have less opportunity to see unfair portrayals. So put everyone in, and then you can have a villain of every color, just like you can have a hero of every color, right? And all the people in between.
I really think that both of these need a remake, or we need someone to do it ended up being a little tongue in cheek, but doing like genuine after school specials again,
Yeah.
that would be fascinating to see in this day and age. Like ABC head up, like, hey, we're gonna do 5 seasons of after school specials dealing with whatever the hell we want to in 2022 through 2027 or something.
Yeah, you could do some really heavy stuff. Like, I'm shocked that we haven't gotten a movie about the young woman who, was raped in college and then went the rest of the term carrying her mattress around that it happened on because the school did nothing. Like,
Yeah.
why have we not, like, these are real things. And I was talking to my wife, Corinne, about this because after school specials, they didn't, as I said, they sort of, when TV movies in general died, they went to the special episode of on running TV shows. And then when on running series sitcoms sort of died, then all of those died. And I think with streaming, we have the opportunity to bring those back. And in a way they are, a Netflix only feature, a Hulu only feature, an Amazon Prime only feature, but bringing them back in a serious way, especially on something like Disney Plus, where you have a large family following, right? You could really have some incredible stories told in ways that are accepting. Like I can imagine a gay teenager or a trans teenager or someone that wants to transition sitting down with their parents and being like, okay, we're going to watch this, and then see, gauging their reaction to see, like, I think I might be a woman, you know what I mean, like, or I might be a man, or I'm gender fluid. Like, I would really like to see these things again, dealing with our next generation's problems and revisiting those, like you said, that really haven't been solved in any way, shape, or form, or not enough.
Yeah. Fortunately or unfortunately, you can take some of these after school specials and we can just do them again. Just do them one more time. Maybe this time it'll stick a little harder, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, right. Well, that is going to be it for part 2 of our after school special. Thank you so much for joining us as always. Thank you to guest Greg Johnson, also Tad Mastroianni, Bar 1. I want to remind everyone to please like and subscribe on YouTube, and also write a review wherever you get your podcast. If you get it on Spotify or Apple Music or Pod Addict, any number of places where you get it, if you write a review for us, even on Facebook, it does a lot to help other people find us. In addition, if you send us a screenshot of that review to cultandclassicpodcast@gmail.com with your address, I'll send you some cool swag. And remember, we are open to suggestions, questions, critiques, hate mail for Tad. Send it on over, cultandclassicpodcast@gmail.com, or DM us on Instagram at cultandclassicpodcast. I'm Nate Wyckoff signing out, and here is the Chud with All About Evil. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Cult and Classic Podcast. This podcast is important to me, but what's more important are the rights, privileges, and freedom from violence of everyone in this country and in this world. And that means supporting Black Lives Matter. If you'd like to make a donation, please go ahead and visit cultandclassicpodcast.com, where we have a list of places you can donate and help out. And please stay safe.